Welcome to another episode of Teen Minds Redefined, where we strive to allow you to foster your relationship with your teenager, have them grow into these beautiful human beings as their own authentic selves, while we help you tap into your own authentic self, one episode at a time. And today we have Ian Tenenbaum. Ian, listen, have you ever noticed? I got a question for the audience. Have you ever noticed that your child's ADHD symptoms seem eerily familiar? Or do you find yourself juggling a million tasks and struggling to focus on any one of them? Either way, you may have ADHD, and we have an expert, Ian Tenenbaum, who's going to help us figure that out. Welcome, Ian. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Ian, what's your story? Tell us why you are where you are and what you're doing and what's the mission first.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Well, full disclaimer, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not licensed to be diagnosing anyone. So let's get that out of the way. My experience is a combination of my own personal story with ADHD as a parent, and then also now as an ADHD executive coach for adults. Mm-hmm. So I have learned a tremendous amount on my journey, and I think it's equipped me to share some of the, indicators, some of the things that people may be questioning. Is that ADHD related? So I think I always like to preface and give the disclaimer that I might say something like it's more common or it's typical or people with ADHD, or if this, then you might. But I'm by no means attempting to diagnose anyone. So anyone who is curious, I always recommend meeting with a psychiatrist. There are a ton of online surveys and self-serve ones. But to really get a clear idea if you do or do not, I would highly recommend scheduling with a psychiatrist who's licensed to diagnose.
Yeah, good. And so you have ADHD.
Correct.
Okay. And tell me how you navigate around that before we get into
parenting and other stuff. Yeah. I feel like how I navigate it now at 43 is very different how I did as a teenager, not being aware of it, how I did in college when I was made aware, but wasn't really taken seriously, or how I treated it my entire adult life, not ever factoring it into my behavior or my awareness. So, quick story is I grew up as a kid who was very active, very hyper, disruptive, charismatic. And I was always labeled and considered so ADD, so ADD. This is in the 80s and 90s. And it was more of a loose joke. It wasn't like I was diagnosed. It was, oh, he's ADD. Oh, he's so ADD. So I never really thought much about it other than it was a explanation for my bad behavior and my hyperactivity. In college, I started failing out, and I had to go home because they kicked me out because I was doing so bad. And the condition to come back was I had to meet with a psychiatrist or psychologist and get some type of help that would allow me to succeed. So in that summer, I did get diagnosed. I was made aware of ADHD, ADD at the time. And I started a 3-month study class to go back to school. I went back to school and I had a newfound energy and enthusiasm. So I was able to squeeze by. But since then, since 19 years old until a few years ago, I never really thought about ADHD as part of my life. It was never something that was ever considered. So fast forward to about 7 years ago, and I'm going through a divorce. I started 2 companies, mixed success, crash and burn. I had a year of reflection and was like, what the hell's going on? I have accomplished these amazing things in my life, and I have so much to be proud of. But I also feel like I'm on a roller coaster, and I'm going up and I'm going down. I'm going up and I'm going. And I was exhausted. And I was like, looking into all these different things and developing self-awareness and understanding. And then it wasn't until someone else said to me, did you ever think all of this stuff you're working on might all be related to ADHD? And a light bulb went off where I was like, oh, I never connected the dots, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I started leaning into that, and I started realizing, oh, that emotional regulation is ADHD related, or, I'm having trouble, remembering things. I don't need more techniques. That's ADHD. And then I connected the dots, and I started seeking out the, nation's best experts. Dr. Hallowell, I saw as my psychiatrist, and got all the support I needed. And I started developing skills and an awareness about this.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, my son was going through school, IEP, all that stuff. And I started realizing that for our kids and youth nowadays, we have a lot of awareness and a lot of support.
Yeah.
But for the 30 to 50-year-old business person, executive, or older, we're just lost in the shuffle, right? You're an adult, figure it out. I don't want to hear it. But these things are very real and very persistent and very frustrating. So I identified that there's an opportunity to build a business around this and help others. And I've been on that journey now for about a year.
I love it. And I'm gonna add into that, because my story, I am diagnosed ADHD 1 year ago, and I am now 59. And the funny thing is, I spent 25 years in the high school system. So the years that I was teaching in a classroom, I noticed, I was like, oh, I can't sit here much longer. And my thoughts would trail off. And then I became the head of department in special ed, which meant I was running around putting out fires all day long. And it was my jam. I was like, there's no ADHD in me. This is great. I can do this. And the only time it really affected me is every time I had to sit in a staff meeting, I would literally, and this was obviously once a week or once a month, I would literally feel nauseous, even thinking that that's what I was doing. And knowing all the time that I've been working with kids who have diagnosed ADHD for 20 years. Am I putting the dots together yet? No, I'm not, because most of the kids I'm working with are boys. And so there's very different symptoms. And I noticed that, so I wasn't very chatty as an adult, but I did notice I was incredibly shy, but I could not focus on somebody's conversation very long at all. I would start fading off, and I would force myself to listen again. And it was so frustrating. And then, of course, the staff meetings. And it wasn't until I decided to start my own business, and I had to sit at this computer, and I had to learn all of this tech stuff, that I thought, now it is having a major impact on my life all day long. And so I went to the psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed. She was almost like, yeah, okay, here, you're done. You don't even have to keep talking. I know what's happening. And so this is where, for me, I accommodated it for years and years and years without any kind of medication. But at this point, I need to try something and to change my life. So no, I'm not pro pushing drugs by any means, but I am saying there is a validity to trying everything. And if nothing works, there is something that could work. So that's my story. And it literally, it has changed my world, because there's no way I would be able to do all of the new startup stuff and focus on that and still get this rolling. So I can appreciate how, there's different stages of life where it is affected and where it isn't. And when you turn it around and start helping people like you're doing, I think that's amazing, amazing, amazing. So let's start with, we're talking about parents who possibly might have ADHD, but I want to ask about first the genetic piece. Is it the apple doesn't fall far from the tree? If your kid has ADHD, you probably have ADHD, or vice versa. Or is there also the possibility that kids see our day-to-day as ADHD parents and think this is just the way it goes? What do you think about that?
So the question has a lot of parts, right? So let's break it down into parts. One part is the biological, right? So is there a biological connection between parents and children? Yes. There's a high correlation. I don't know the exact stats now. It's not guaranteed, but parents with ADHD have a really high likelihood that their kids will. So there's a strong link. It's not always. It's not definitely not 100%. I like to grab that stat, but there is a high correlation biologically. So that's one part of your question. Another part of the question is, I guess maybe inherent in that answer, is that it is biological. It's not environmental. So when we're talking about ADHD as a medical diagnosis and a biological difference of the brain, these aren't learned behaviors and these aren't environmentally developed or from watching. So that's the baseline, let's say. So if a child has ADHD, it's biological. They didn't choose it. The parents didn't choose it. The parents didn't give it, other than potentially genetically, right? They didn't, through parenting, create an ADHD. Like when people talk about, our society now with that, it's making everyone ADHD. I would. There's a tremendous research and science, and that's not the case. But is it exacerbating, or is it amplifying, or is it making people with ADHD have more challenges, more struggles? Then probably, yeah, right. So maybe hundreds of years ago, a lot of us with ADHD would have been the ones that are constantly busy, physically active, high stimulation, dealing with crises, going out hunting. There wasn't sitting at a computer for hours and writing a report, right? So I don't think they would have ever noticed, I can't sit and focus. They'd be like, well, go get food. We're going to die. Why would you be sitting and trying to focus? And if they are sitting and trying to focus in a hunting environment, there's all the conditions present for someone with ADHD to excel. There's pressure, there's urgency, there's, the dopamine, there's, the danger, there's the immediate gratification. There's all these factors that would make that the perfect circumstance for someone with ADHD to really zone in and focus and excel. So we've got biological. Yes, there's a link. Is it, something parents, create ADHD children through their behavior? No. Are there probably, I don't know, studies or science, a impact that parents with ADHD are having on their ADHD children without knowing it based on their behavior? I would be willing to, I would say yes. So if somebody with ADHD is already at a deficit in certain areas, which means they need more help than others, they need more guidance, more structure. But then you have the parents who are not equipped or not capable themselves of even identifying that or providing it. That's where maybe gets to the root of your question. Is there that kind of, challenge? So yes. So what I think is probably the best route is as many parents as possible can learn about their own ADHD, how it presents, skills and strategies, and then be aware of it in their children and learn what do they need from them to compensate, and be able to delineate between that's a kid who's disobedient and is just being a brat versus that's a kid with XYZ, mental, social, emotional challenge, and they need this other type of support. Very challenging line for us parents to navigate.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said environmental has nothing to do with it. So before we even dive into everything, there is the release of all the guilt for parents thinking, oh my God, my ADHD completely screwed up my kid. So done. We don't have to feel guilty about that. We're done. So let's dive in. Let's talk about what are we looking at? So And I'm going to say, because there's so many podcasts out that are amazing, that are helping parents identify ADHD in their kids, but we're turning the tables. We're turning the tables because we need to know, are you really just struggling with the day-to-day stuff that everybody struggles with? Or is there some factors and indicators there where you need some more support, and you come by it honestly and there's support there? So what are we looking for?
So, couple examples. If we're going to start looking at how to delineate between what is, let's call it typical, neurotypical, and what is atypical or ADHD, it's helpful to start the conversation with some, like agreed language, right? So the challenge that a lot of people find is when you start learning about these things in our children, most parents, most adults say, everyone struggles with it. Oh, like one example, managing time. Oh yeah, I'm forgetful. Oh yeah, or I'm always working on time management, right? But there's some language that we can look at. So there's things like occasionally, frequently, struggling, repeatedly, typically. Okay, so when you start looking at these words, right? So the challenge with ADHD is, even though it has been proven with brain scans and biology and neuroscience that there is a brain difference, the way it presents is often, a little bit subtle. So it's like the spectrum concept. So in parents, maybe managing your kids' homework is always, not always, managing homework for all adults, for all parents, may be frustrating or challenging. But someone with ADHD may find that it feels nearly impossible, not to get their kid to do it, but for them themselves to be able to, hold them accountable, remind them, discipline them. So then it feels like, oh, they should be able to do it. They should be, because it's overwhelming to us and we're frustrated as it is. So then we want to put it on them and say, I shouldn't have to, I shouldn't. So there may be this nuance where maybe a typical parent might be a little better at, okay, here's what you need. Here's what's expected. You need to do it now. And they'll hold that structure. Where someone with ADHD may be like, I don't know. You know what you're supposed to do. It's like a flustered energy, right?
Yeah.
So that's one example. So another example may be like with organization, where I'd say everybody in the world, most people have some areas or some frustrations or some amount of organization. But someone with ADHD may be the more extreme of that, repeatedly late for school because repeatedly can't find their keys, repeatedly forgets to tell their kid something till the last minute, and then repeatedly feels frustrated. So there's these patterns that develop, and it, whether it's, managing things, creating structure. Another good one is in discipline. So much of parenting, in my limited experience, but what I've learned is the ability to be consistent with consequences, with rules, with structure, right? And when you're a parent with inconsistent expectations, inconsistent consequences, inconsistent discipline, it really makes it difficult to develop that behavior change in the child, right? So someone with ADHD is going to have a much harder time implementing that and holding that consistency than someone else might, right? And that's where it starts to all fall apart, where, I'll, speak from example, sometimes I know exactly what I need to do to create these structures and expectations, but I find myself, we often want to redirect it, or we want to project it onto them, but I'm now noticing I'm overwhelmed with all the things I need to do to get him to XYZ, right? And when I'm overwhelmed with it, then we dip into another area that parents with ADHD may struggle with, is emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And where a neurotypical parent, the average brain, might get upset once in a while, might get frustrated, might lose their temper once in a while. But with someone with ADHD, it might feel consistent, like every day, every time, every every day we do homework, every time we leave for that. And forget about the child. There's this parent nervous system that's always on alert. Doesn't have the ability to step back and say, I'm the parent. Okay. They're being difficult, but I need to think clearly and figure out how to parent. Someone with ADHD might be like 0 to 60, overwhelmed, they that. And people with ADHD have a deficit in our ability to regulate our emotions. So if a typical brain, a typical biology has a better handle on throttling, like, okay, calm it down. We're going to be late. They messed up again, but I have to be the parent. Someone with ADHD is going to be more likely to be, agitated, overwhelmed, not able to think clearly, not able to then, so those are just some of the ways we kind of go down, and they all intersect, right? If you're organized, you may get more flustered. If you're flustered, you may have emotional regulation. Emotional regulation, you can't think of the rules right. Now you're inconsistent with your So if any of this sounds familiar, and it just feels like it's a pattern that's going around and around and around, and you can't figure out how to break that, it might be worth looking into. Oh, do I maybe have ADHD? And maybe some of this is my challenge and my work to do as well.
Yeah. And not your fault. Totally not your fault.
Correct.
Because I think we can take on, as parents, right? We can just take on so much guilt and so much responsibility, and it can just pile and pile and pile. And if we can sort it out to, oh, okay, well, this isn't my fault. And there's things that I can check into and people I can talk to and supports. I can't imagine if you are there different things to look for if your kid's got ADHD and you've got ADHD? How does that clash? How does that look in a house?
So I'll use an analogy. Imagine a married couple, who are both high conflict personalities. Both of them thrive on confrontation and arguments and fights. How will those conflicts go? How will those fights go? Those will be explosive, right? So they'll go from 0 to, if you have one high conflict and maybe one avoidant, it may balance out, you have one high conflict and one, it may kind of, but both high conflict are gonna, right? So you have a child with ADHD struggling with structure, with emotional regulation, with consistency, with remembering. Now you have a parent who also is. They forgot to remind him. They forgot to do it. They're mad because they forgot to do it. They're mad because no one reminded them. They're now getting upset because they're late. They're now getting upset because it's not their fault. They're now getting upset because it's always the kid who didn't XYZ. They're now getting upset because every day I upset my parent. They're now getting more.
Oh my God.
It just kind of goes around and around and around and around and around and around.
I can feel it. I can totally feel it. So, you know what? I kind of want to go backwards just for a second, because when I say it's not your fault, maybe there's people out there that have actually no idea about the science of what ADHD actually is. Can you talk about that? Because for the same as what you said before, oh, everybody has ADHD. You know what? I am so happy that people are getting more aware and recognizing and getting diagnosed with this. And so I am overjoyed when I hear somebody say everybody has ADHD. Yeah, that's because people are actually becoming aware. And I think that's good news. So what is ADHD and what does it look like in our brain?
Yeah, so a couple examples I like to use because people are more familiar with other types of health challenges. So if somebody was struggling with their eyesight, it's just automatic. You get glasses, you get contacts, you get, nobody says, your vision is, in your head, or you're making it up, or, society, everyone has glasses. You just go get your glasses and you move on with your life, right? If you forget them to drive, you probably say, I'm not going to drive because it's dangerous, right? I need them to see, right? It's just very binary. It's very, if you had a friend or a family member who was struggling to go to work or leave the house because they were struggling with depression, I don't think most people would say, well, everybody gets upset. Oh, everybody has a hard life. They're just being a spoiled brat, right? There's a point where you'd say, okay, they probably need medication, right? There's probably some clinic, they could be suicidal. Like, it's not a joke, right? Like, there's something going on different for that person. So to brush over it and say, why don't you try going for a walk? Like, go watch a funny show. Like, that cheers me up. You'd be like, I don't think you're getting it. Like, they're in a dark place. Like, they need like a hospital or medication, right? So I think if we start looking at these things as, okay, there's the eyesight, these are all physical differences, right? So there is enough research and plenty of studies, and I don't know all the exact parts of the brain, but people with ADHD don't naturally, produce as much dopamine. There's different parts of the brain that are responsible for different functions that are, conclusively proven through scans and, biology and neuroscience, structurally different, right? And these have direct impacts. So I think back to your comment on it's not your fault. I think I've heard this many times and I love repeating it. There's a difference between your fault and your responsibility, right? So these things are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. So to just say, oh, well, I have ADHD, so I don't have to, or I have ADHD, that's why, it's an excuse. I think it's helpful to become aware and say, oh, just a heads up, I have ADHD, so I might forget. I'm sorry, it's not personal, remind me, right? That's different than, it's not my fault. Don't bug me about it. So our responsibility would be, if you are noticing a lot of these symptoms and challenges are persistent over a lifetime, and they feel like they're hurting your quality of life, then it would be your responsibility, in my opinion, to do a little research, maybe go meet a doctor, see if there's solutions for you.
That's such a good point. That is such a good point. I like that. And, even from our experience, once you get to the other side of that, it looks very, very different and is very much worth looking into. All right. So I'm a mom or a dad, just got diagnosed with ADHD. I have these teenagers in my house. Can you give us some strategies with anything? Again, the homework. Can you give us some strategies with nervous regulation?
So I'll take a step back and start from the top, because if somebody's newly diagnosed, there's likely, what I experience with all my coaching clients and friends also, and people I interact with, is there's this light bulb relief moment of, oh, wow, there's, a light was shined, like the person putting on glasses, like, oh, so the first step before trying to over architect any behavior change would just be starting with this new baseline awareness. So reading the books, Hallowell and all the famous Driven to Distraction, stuff like that. There's new on ADHD 2.0. There's a lot of people that are writing great books. So just start learning and understanding it, because the more a parent, I think, understands it and embraces it as a real thing, there's probably an immediate relief of acceptance of the child and understanding of the child. That's like half the battle. So when you could say, oh, well, my child keeps forgetting this, it's not because they're doing it to spite you and they know they could, but they're intentionally manipulative. Like, they're not that smart, right? It's not. So usually it's because they forgot, or it's not a priority, or you haven't set up the proper incentives for them. Like, so when you can just kind of like start, learning about the key traits, you start noticing it more in your child and in yourself, then you can start kind of trying to like, meet in the middle. The example of the two high conflict parents, if they were in couples therapy, the first step might be, if you notice the other one getting upset, take a step back. Maybe not time to have that, discussion, right? So with a parent ADHD, a child ADHD, the first step is probably like, hey, take a step back. Maybe you're not setting something up right for them. Maybe this is part of their ADHD. Just creating that space between what am I supposed to do about this, and if we pause and say, well, wait, let me figure out what's even going on. And half of the time I find with myself, it's a result of something I didn't do well enough that I can own and say, well, what do I expect of them? Like, I didn't really set clear expectations. I changed every week. So of course they're not, complying. So then I turn the tables. What do I have to do now? How can I work on this? And then it has nothing to do with them. Or sometimes it's, well, that's more challenging for someone with ADHD. So how am I going to expect them to do that? Okay, I need to like research and come up with strategies that will work for a child with it, right? So just creating that, like, there's not like a silver bullet. It's more just developing that pattern of, I'm going to pause and I'm going to try to understand what's going on and then assess, is this something on me? Is this on them, or is this both?
Yeah, good point. Good point. So there's success stories, right? You're coaching. Tell us there's success stories. Tell us there's a light at the end of this tunnel. Tell us that, even in general, the changes people are finding when they work with you. What are they seeing? What are they coming out with?
Yeah. So like I was touching on with that last example, when you said, what are the strategies, so much of it really stems from the understanding, the self-awareness. Just, that's like, in my opinion, half of it, right? Just understanding when something is caused and why it's happening. A big challenge for us with ADHD is the, regulation of our nervous system.
Yeah.
And that becomes something that's like hard coded. It's automatic over years and years. And what I'm finding with myself and with clients is through attention to it and focus on it and practice, we can start to gradually rewire our nervous system and adjust it. And that so much of what we're talking about with ADHD stems from either the overly upregulated nervous system getting too, excited, or the downregulated, we are lacking motivation, and we may be overexcited or overstimulated or dysregulated. Those are all floods of stuff, and it's hard to think clearly, and it's hard to access our executive functioning. It's hard. Yeah. And then when we're downregulated, it's really hard to, motivate, to, have, initiative. So long answer of saying, you said, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Yes, 100%. And I think so much of the benefit comes from just the sheer evolution of our nervous system, and we'll start to see we're more calm, we're more thoughtful, we're more organized. Like with glasses, like with, clinical depression, we're not gonna like eradicate. These aren't things that you fix and remove from your life.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other part of it, is the self-compassion, self-acceptance. These are things that we learn to manage, and we manage well with skills and tools and practice. These are not things that we eradicate.
No.
So long answer, but yes, a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. But there's not really an end to the tunnel, I guess.
Yeah. Well, then and also, if you're a parent with ADHD and your kid has ADHD, they can also really learn from you putting your tools into place, from you taking that step back, and they will see, you don't have to tell them. They will see the difference if you're taking that space, if you're taking a step back, even if you're saying out loud, "Ooh, ADHD kicking in. Hold on, I need to take a breath." All of these things are so important. I find that, years ago, even 30 years ago when I was parenting, I felt like I couldn't be vulnerable in front of my kids. I had to have all the answers, and everything that I said was right. And, I was like a human Google over here trying to get the answers. I would never say, "Oh, I'm totally stressed out. I need to back off." Or, "Oh, I don't have that answer." I would never say that. So this is the time where it's like, okay, we need to shift that big time, because my kids, who, I don't know if I'm outing them or not, might have ADHD, but are able to see, years ago would be able to see, oh, okay, I see mom do that. That was helpful. Maybe I'll try that. And I think that's so important, like so important. It's such a shift in parenting. And I know you don't coach just parents. You coach adults. Tell us a little bit about your coaching and how we can work with you, where we can find you.
Yeah, well, first I'll just add on to what you just said, which really deserves more attention, is the idea of the modeling. And the modeling in a parenting or in a relationship with a partner or in a business, like modeling is so critical.
Yeah.
It's really hard to model something that we haven't developed ourselves. And that's where some of that feedback loop of, oh, well, I know what they're supposed to do, and I'm just trying to get them to do it. It's like, but they're not if you don't. So I think, yeah, modeling is probably ground zero for a lot of this stuff. Yeah. So I work with executives, some startup founders. I have a newsletter, accountable.live, and I just launched a private group community. So it's a group coaching program, co-working, body doubling, and weekly workshops, and a Friday planning session where everyone comes together and plans their week. It's very supportive. It's adults with ADHD, and we're going to keep adding on different topics and different classes and workshops and things that people need support with. So it's an ongoing, like I said before, this no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no end of, managing ADHD is about creating the structure. We all know ADHD is frustrating because we know what to do, most of us, we just don't do it.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is creating the scaffolding and the structure, and my group program does exactly that.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. And I will put all of that in the show notes. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to talk about? You want to say any last words?
No, I think we covered it. I think it really comes down to being honest with yourself and the self-awareness. And I think the closing words, I think you touched on it. It's modeling. That is really so critical. And that's going back to your earlier question about, is it biological? Are we messing up our kids? Like, you are modeling, whether you are aware of it or not. And if
Yes.
you're modeling bad habits and bad behavior, you're taking a kid with ADHD and you're reinforcing bad or counterproductive habits.
Yeah.
And that's where the loop does become a little bit difficult, to break. So, work on ourselves, and, our kids will reap the rewards.
And I'm going to say Ian's mic drop is not your fault, but your responsibility. Great words. Thank you, Ian, for joining us. Thank you for listening to Teen Minds Redefined. I'm so grateful you're here. Please share this with anybody. You just never know who's struggling with what. And we need to get this into so many ears. So